Hi everyone, and welcome to the session today. I'm really pleased to be with you, even though it is just virtually, and looking forward to seeing all your comments and your questions that I'll be happy to answer at the end. So please do use the chat box to write in any comments, any questions. I might not be able to see them while we present or while I present, but I will be picking them up at the end. So please do that. Okay, so just to introduce myself a little bit, my name is Jasmin Silver and I'm a language research manager at Cambridge University Press. So the language research team here looks at how we can teach the English language most effectively and what we should be teaching as well. So first of all, on the what, traditionally we've looked at how frequent different words in the English language are, and what errors learners make when they learn the English language. And on the how side, we look at the strategies that we can be using to teach English most effectively, and also how we can integrate different skills into the English language teaching. So the biggest project that I've been involved with is the Cambridge Life Competencies framework. So this is a framework we've developed over a number of years that looks at how we can put life competencies into our English language teaching. And that is the subject of today's talk. So I'd like to cover three main things during the course of today's session. The first is really covering why we should teach life competencies in the English language classroom. Secondly, what exactly should we teach? And thirdly, how can we teach this effectively? So by the end of the session, hopefully you have a better idea of these three things. So let's turn to the first question. Why should we teach life competencies, particularly in English? So to start with, I wanted to show you a postcard from 1900, the year 1900, from France. And this was a whole series of postcards that was produced, and they were predicting what the world would be like in 100 years from then. So in the year 2000, this was the prediction that they made for schools. So as you can see, the teacher is sitting on the right-hand side of the picture, feeding books into a machine. A little boy is turning a handle to crank all the knowledge through the machine, I guess, and it's traveling up through the wires and into the brains of the students who are sitting there very passively taking all this information in. So maybe share in the chat box whether you think this would have been good if it had come true. But as you know, this is not what our classrooms look like. And I don't think many of us would want to have a classroom like this. For one, it would be a little bit boring just feeding knowledge into a machine and sitting back watching your students absorb it. And also for the students, no doubt. But also, it feels like there's something missing, right? So I think we have a sense that education is not just about knowledge. It's also about skills and attitudes. And without those, we are not really giving a full education to our students. So think about our current situation. I know everyone is talking about the pandemic, and apologies for bringing it up again, but I do think it illustrates really well why we need not just knowledge, but skills as well to tackle difficult situations. So first of all, in the current situation, we need to think creatively about how to solve the many challenges that we face, and also to see the new opportunities that it brings with it too. So if you think about schooling, how can we think creatively to teach children who can't come to school at the moment because there might be a lockdown, or they might be in self-isolation? But also, what are the opportunities? So how can we use this technology that many of us haven't been using to teach yet, to actually make teaching better in certain ways? So it requires a great deal of creative thinking to do that. We also need to be good critical thinkers to evaluate all the information that's coming to us every day about this pandemic. So which information should we be believing? Which information should we be a little bit more skeptical of? And how do we decide? So that is really what critical thinking is all about, and obviously a very useful skill right now. And finally, we need to collaborate with others. We won't be able to solve the problem, for example, finding a vaccine by ourselves. We need a real collaboration of different people across different sectors, with different knowledge, with different skills, to be able to solve really complex problems. And I'm sure you can think of other skills that we might need in this pandemic. Feel free to put them in the chat box. So this is just one example, but really our world is moving really, really fast, changing all the time, and we're going to need these skills more and more. And that's why also employers look for these skills as well. So a recent survey of employers said that out of the top 5 skills that they were looking for, it was these things that they were particularly important to them. So problem-solving skills, ability to work in a team, and communication skills. So we can see that employers really want these skills as well, and so we should be teaching them through school. And you might notice that these skills are now part of many curricula and government national curricula as well to reflect this. Okay, so we can see that it's important, but why should we develop these in the English classroom? Well, actually, you can develop these skills in any subject, but there are some advantages of teaching English at the same time as these skills. Firstly, because we already develop a lot of these skills through what we're doing in typical English teaching activities. So for example, in many classrooms, we're already doing group work. We're already having speaking activities, and we're having projects. So in group work, we're learning how to collaborate with each other. In speaking activities, we're learning how to communicate. And projects, we're learning how to think creatively, think critically, and problem solve. So we're already doing quite a lot that fits in very well with these competencies. We might just need to increase the amount we do or think about it in a more systematic way. But actually, we're already quite far down the line in integrating life competencies in our English language teaching. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of why we should teach these skills. And now I want to turn to what exactly should we be teaching? So I've already talked about critical thinking, creative thinking, those kind of things. If you have any other ideas about skills, then please put them in the chat box. So if you do a search for 21st century skills, life competencies, you get a lot of results, all these great frameworks, but all of them really a little bit different, with a different emphasis, and trying to integrate all of these into English language teaching can feel really overwhelming. And we can't possibly integrate all of these different things in at the same time, or it seems like we can't. So that is why we put together the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework. We had a look at all these other frameworks. We did a close analysis of them, pulled out the main themes, and made it relevant for English language teachers. You'll notice that all of the frameworks that I showed on the previous slide are not particularly for English language teachers, they're for education in general. So we really wanted to apply the frameworks to English language teaching, and that's what we've done in our framework. So when we were developing the framework, we had 3 main aims. The first is we wanted to include a breadth of skills in one system. So you can see how many skills there are. And we didn't want to just focus on one, we wanted to have a complete system. So we have got a wide breadth of skills in that one framework. We also wanted to show how the skills develop across different stages of learning, so different age groups. Critical thinking, for example, is going to look quite different at pre-primary level than it does at higher education. So we wanted to show what that would look like at different stages. And finally, we wanted to have enough detail for it to be useful for teachers and when they are assessing these skills. So in the frameworks that we had seen previously, there wasn't as much detail as we might like for teaching. So we've really tried to get that detail into our framework so that there isn't so much work that needs to be done from a teacher who probably won't have time. I know from myself, from my teaching experience, that there is just not enough time to really engage with these frameworks and pull out what you need from them in many cases. So the framework is split across a number of booklets that you can download from our website. They're all free, so you don't have to pay for any of them. And they're all available at cambridge.org/CLCF. So just to tell you what's available, we have an introduction booklet which gives a general overview of the framework and gives a few examples of how this is integrated. We also have a competency booklet for each of the competencies that we have, which explains what the competency is, what it looks like at different stages of learning, and it also gives some examples of our textbooks that incorporate these skills and also some teaching tips at the end. And finally, we have the stage of learning booklets. So this is where we've pulled together all the competencies for a particular age group or stage of learning, we call it, into one booklet. So that, for example, if you're teaching adult learners, you have all of the competencies for adult learners, all the teaching tips in one booklet. So the information in the competency booklets and the stage of learning booklets is the same, it's just split up in a different way, essentially. All right, so what do you think is covered in our Cambridge Life Competencies framework? Which skills, which competencies? Please do type in the chat box and I'll slowly reveal them as we do that. So the first one we have is creative thinking. So I already mentioned that a couple of times, so it might not be a surprise that that's in our framework. This is a really important skill for solving problems. Equally critical thinking. We need critical thinking to evaluate information. It's also really important in solving problems as well. Learning to learn is another really key one. So we have to be constantly learning. When things are changing so quickly, we need to be learning new skills all the time, and knowing how to do that independently is a really key skill. Communication, obviously very, very important as well. It's important to be working with others in leadership. We are having new ways of communicating all the time now through internet, webinars, but video is becoming more popular, how to communicate through social media. And then we also have collaboration. So how do we work well with one another and use each other's complementing skills to best effect? And finally, social responsibilities. So knowing what rights and responsibilities we have as citizens, taking care of our environment, and those who are in our communities. So these are the 6 main competencies. And this is just an overview figure of the whole framework. So as you can see, the competencies are in the middle here. And these are underpinned by 3 foundation layers. So these are emotional development, digital literacy, and discipline knowledge. And what we are saying with the foundation layers is that these foundation layers are woven through the rest of the competencies. So although I can't go into it in too much detail today, I'll just give you an example. So emotional development is about things like managing your emotions, having empathy for others, and so on. And you can see that you need that to be able to collaborate well. You need that to be able to learn well. You need it to be able to be creative. So these are kind of foundations for the other competencies. All right, so let's just assume that you are a teacher and you would like to start incorporating more life competencies into your classrooms. So having all of these competencies is a little bit much. Again, it starts getting a bit overwhelming, and trying to fit all of them in can feel a little bit too much in one go. So we would always suggest that you start with one of them that you would like to develop more in your learners. So I'll give you just a minute or so to read the descriptions of the different life competencies, and perhaps you can write in the chat which life competency you think you would like to develop in your learners or your children most. All right, it'll be interesting to see whether people have written the same kind of things or different things. So do have a look in the chat to see what other people have said. All right, so now you've chosen your competency. I'm going to choose learning to learn, especially now because students are perhaps going to have to take more responsibility for their own learning when they're not able to come to school. There are 3 different areas of learning to learn that we have highlighted, and we call these core areas. So for each of the competencies we do this, we break it down into 3 or 4 areas to focus on. So with learning to learn, we have developing skills and strategies for learning. We have taking control of own learning. And we have reflecting on and evaluating own learning. So these 3 things really make up the competency that is learning to learn. And then actually, we go a step further and say, okay, well, what is involved in these core areas? So in the middle, in the white, you can see the core areas. And then on the far right-hand side, you can see the different components of these core areas. So for example, if I want to focus on taking control of own learning, I can see that that involves setting goals and planning for learning, taking the initiative to improve your own learning, managing your environment, your learning environment, and managing attitudes and emotions. So now I can be getting more of a sense of the kinds of things that I might want to be including in my lessons if I want to improve my students' learner autonomy. So yeah, these are the core areas, as I said, in the middle, and the competencies on the right-hand side. And as I mentioned earlier on, we have then different levels, different age groups or stages of learning in the framework to show you what this would look like at those different levels. So we have everything from pre-primary to primary, secondary, higher education, and at work. And then we produce can-do statements for each of these levels. So for example, with learning to learn, I might be interested in setting goals and planning for learning. So at primary level, this might look like this can-do statement: identifies the learning objectives for the lesson or the task. So that's kind of a foundation skill that you need for learning to learn. You need to understand what the task is all about or what the lesson is all about. If you move on to secondary, you can see it gets a bit more complicated, produces a revision plan to focus on key skills and knowledge in a systematic way. And then at work, again, it's a little bit more in-depth and complicated. So sets achievable language learning goals, for example, related to specific skills or exam results. So they might independently be making some goals related to their listening skills, or perhaps getting a certain score on an IELTS exam or another exam that they're sitting. So that should probably show you the amount of detail that goes into the framework, which is quite a lot. And the more detailed you get, the closer you get to thinking of activities that you could do. So you might already have some ideas about how you could integrate some of these things into your classes. But hopefully I can give you a few more now, and we'll talk about how we can teach life competencies effectively in the classroom. So you have this framework, and there are 4 ways we think that might be useful to use them. The first way is to plan the curriculum using them. So we can make our learning objectives when we're planning the curriculum at the beginning of the year, for example, by using the breakdown of the different competencies to form learning objectives. So maybe you use the core areas or the components or the can-do statements to make learning objectives for your classes. Secondly, we can use them on a lesson-by-lesson basis to plan learning materials. So you can design your tasks to bring out the competencies that you would like. So we do this in Cambridge University Press. We use the components, the core areas, and the can-do statements to design tasks that will bring out these life competencies in a good way. We can also then use these parts of the framework to assess how our students are doing. So we can put together rubrics or checklists of the competencies and the breakdown of the competencies to see where our students are already doing well in these things and where we might want to focus more on developing those skills. So maybe I'm quite good at planning for my learning and setting goals. Maybe I'm not so good at managing my learning environment so that I get easily distracted. So the detail of the framework should hopefully give a good starting point for assessing where your students are at. And finally, in teacher development. So the framework can be used to get to know the skills better, to get to know the life competencies better, to reflect on how much you already teach life competencies, and to look for places that you could teach more. And then that will feed into better lesson planning. And just a note, I sort of mentioned this before, but the framework really we see is being used as a little bit like a tourist map that I've got up here. So there are all these possibilities that you have to integrate life competencies into your teaching, but you can't possibly integrate them all in, the next 2 months. So what we suggest is that it's laying out the possibilities for you, but then you select the ones that are most useful for you and concentrate on those, at least to start with, so that you get the most benefit out of it, rather than trying to integrate them all and burning yourself out. Then just select a few. Also, the materials that are produced nowadays are naturally including a lot of these life competencies. So actually some of the work has been done already, and you don't need to worry too much about making your own materials. Of course, there's always ways, if you have a particular competency that you would like to develop more in your students, then you can add in extra supplementary material. but it's a good starting point. The course books nowadays are good starting points. So certainly in Cambridge University Press, we are using the framework to develop our course books so that you'll see that it's integrated throughout our courses. So I don't expect you to read all these little post-its on here, but you can see that in just some standard tasks, we've got all kinds of life competencies dealt with in some sort of way. So we have something about April Fool's Day here, so that is increasing our intercultural awareness, which is important for social responsibilities. We have some creative and critical thinking on this side, some evaluating learning success, that's to do with learning to learn. So you will see already that our materials include quite a lot of life competency type activities. But I'm just going to go into more detail for a few of them. So first of all, one of our primary courses, you can see here, asks our students to create a language game. And I'll just zoom in a little bit. So here they have to discuss what are the games that they like. They have to brainstorm what ideas they have for making a new language game. They have to create, using materials, this game, present the game to the class, and then at the end they need to reflect and listen to feedback from their classmates. So again, in the chat, if you would just like to have a look at the competencies on the side here and think which competencies are these activities bringing out. All right, so hopefully some of you will have thought of creative thinking, this brainstorming idea, coming up with ideas. There's also creative thinking in actually creating the game itself. They're presenting, so they're communicating. They're reflecting, so they're learning. That's important for learning to learn, reflecting on what went well and what could be better. So as you can see, a whole range of life competencies in this one activity. If we have a look at secondary, again, we have an activity that is more sort of project-based, and I'll zoom in on what the activity is. So they have been looking at inventions, and they are going to choose their own invention and create a timeline. So as you can see in exercise number 5, they have to decide what tasks they need to complete in a group to make their timeline. They have to set deadlines for themselves, decide who's going to do each task, research the information they need, and find pictures or make pictures for their timeline. And then after that, they'll be presenting and looking at their classmates' timelines and picking out the most interesting ones. So again, have a little think about what life competencies are coming out here. Just give you a few seconds to do that. All right, so yes, collaboration. They are working in groups and they have to decide who's going to do what. So that's a really important collaborative skill. They're setting long-term and short-term goals. That's part of learning to learn, as well as collaboration as well, trying to keep everyone on track. Researching the information, they need some critical thinking as well. So when they look up the information on the internet, how reliable is it? What kind of websites are they going to use? And communication, of course, yes, presenting their timeline to other students. So again, a whole range of different life competencies in there. Okay, and just one more example from higher education. So like I said, we try and develop these across all the stages of learning. So here we have a speaking task that has a number of stages. And again, I'll zoom in a little bit so that we can see this speaking task. Here we have to give a short presentation about an invention or discovery that has changed our lives. And as part of that, as the preparation on your own, you have to prepare an ideas map about the invention that you've chosen. You then have to work with a partner and discuss the questions on your ideas map. You're giving each other feedback, and then you're working in small groups towards the end of the task. And then once you have completed your presentation, you have to complete a task checklist where you have to tick off things that you have done well. So again, what kind of competencies is this involving? Well, by presenting, obviously you've got communication in there. You have to do a little bit of critical thinking in this ideas map. And you're working with other people, so collaboration again. And perhaps a little bit of creative thinking as well, thinking about inventions and how you're going to present that. All right. So those are some quite general life competencies tasks where you can see quite a few different life competencies being brought out. They tend to be more project-based, slightly longer tasks. But if you want to focus on a particular competency, you can always do that by taking what you already have in your textbook and just pulling it out a little bit more. So bringing that competency out a little bit more. So I've set a little challenge here. I'll just see if I can get rid of my picture. I'm not sure if that's going to work, but to see the task at the top, just in case you can't see it. This task asks you to match the TV shows in the box with the photos that are on the page. So you have things like cartoon, documentary, game show, reality show. So that can be a fairly typical task that you might do to introduce new vocabulary. And the challenge is, imagine that you've just done this task, you've just introduced this vocabulary in your classroom and you've practiced it. And now it's time to set some homework to develop a life competency. So you've got a choice here: creative thinking, learning to learn, and social responsibilities. So I'd like you just to choose one of them and think, how could I extend this task to set a piece of homework that's going to develop one of these competencies? And please do write your ideas in the chat. This is the bit where I really love these interactive online sessions, because you can see everyone's ideas coming up. And actually, I tend to copy and paste all the chat from these sessions so that I can remember all the ideas that people had, because they're always really good ones in there. All right. So yeah, just choosing one of the competencies here: creative thinking, learning to learn, or social responsibilities. All right, so I'm going to give you one idea of my own. So I've chosen learning to learn. And in learning to learn, I want to help my students become more autonomous. So what I might do is ask students to find an English version of a cartoon or a soap opera or a game show, any of these really, in the box, and ask them to find one that they watch or they know of in Romanian, and see if they can find an English version of it, and just watch a few minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, so that they can report back how it was different. And this can be the starting point for then sending them off to do a more extended task where they can watch a whole episode over a week or two to do some independent listening practice. So it's a really nice way of sort of gently nudging students into doing some independent listening practice. So an example, I understand is available in both languages, Romanian and English, is MasterChef. So if you've got students who really like cooking, this could be a good one for them. So they could watch a few minutes of the English MasterChef and comment on what is different, maybe also what's the same. So are the challenges the same? What about the presenters? Obviously, the presenters are going to be different. Do they look the same? Do they have similar personalities? Is the studio the same? All kinds of things that they could report back on. And it doesn't have to be a big report. It can just be a few sentences that they would report back to the class when they next meet. So if you have younger students, perhaps it might be more of a cartoon, like The Simpsons or SpongeBob SquarePants. They're usually available in lots of different languages. And perhaps if people are not interested in cookery, or reality shows, there are more serious ones, like documentaries. So they could choose a wildlife documentary in Romanian and in English and see if there are any differences in the style. So there are lots and lots of opportunities here. So that would be my suggestion. And yeah, hopefully there are lots of good suggestions coming in on the chat as well. Just to go back and say, for creative thinking, perhaps you get students to create their own show. Social responsibilities, you could ask them to watch a documentary on something to do with the environment or a refugee crisis. So there are lots and lots of ways of taking a very simple task and creating more out of it through life competencies. All right. So I just wanted to give you some general tips for doing these kind of things, both in your planning, when you're actually carrying out the activity, and after the activity itself. So these are mainly aimed at teachers. So when you're planning your lessons, as well as having your learning objective for what language you'd like your students to learn, consider also having a life competencies learning objective, so that you have both of those there, and it makes it really clear that you're developing both the language and the skill. Then you can use the framework to find a suitable learning objective. So from the booklets that I mentioned at the beginning, you can download the booklet for the competency that you're interested in and choose either a core area or a component or a can-do statement to use as your learning objective. And then just consider any language that you need to teach or that you need to provide to help learners develop this life competency, and whether you might want to use students' first language at some point. So depending on what life competency you are doing and how complicated the task is, and obviously your students' level of English, we're not shy about saying use Romanian, for example, for a small part, just to keep the lesson moving. Obviously the language focused parts should be focused on English, but if it's necessary, you can go into L1, we call it, so the learner's first language. But a way of getting around that, if you really want to avoid that, is to make sure you have the language that students might need for them. So you might have a little mat with phrases on to help them collaborate well, for example, or phrases to help them think critically about something. Then during the lesson, it's good to make students aware that they're developing their life competencies as an objective of the lesson. So you don't need to keep it secret that you're developing a life competency. That's actually quite engaging for students to know that they're not just developing the language, but they're also developing something that's really a key skill for them. While your students are carrying out the activities, observe them and give them feedback on life competencies as well as their language use. So for example, if you're encouraging your students to collaborate, then give them feedback on how well they're collaborating as well as what language they're using and any errors or any good uses of language that they have. So you might give them a little prod to suggest that they ask if everyone has contributed to the discussion, as well as maybe pointing out a little error that you might want them to correct. And also a good thing to do is encourage the students to self-assess and peer assess. So you might be watching them carry out the activities and giving them feedback, which is really helpful. But also students would really benefit from self-assessment and peer assessment too. One reason is you probably can't watch everyone at the same time, so you can't give them as detailed feedback as you would like often. But also it's a really good skill. If you can self-assess, you need a really good understanding of the skill, and you develop a much better understanding of the skill if you need to self-assess and peer assess too. I like to do this in a very simple way, which is using WWW and EBI, which, if you have not heard of this before, stands for what went well. So something that they need to comment on that they've just done that went really well, and even better if, which is something that they could improve for the next time. So some teachers have one WWW and one EBI, some have two WWWs and one EBI. If you're going to have an uneven number or unequal numbers, it's better to have more WWWs than EBIs, because it's more motivating, really. Okay, and finally, during the lesson, use your observations to determine your students' strengths and weaknesses, and use this to plan your future lessons. So if you notice that your students are actually really good at asking their peers asking all their peers for their opinions, but they're not so good at perhaps dividing up the work, then maybe you focus on dividing up the work a little bit more in a project the next time, and you give them some phrases maybe that would help them do that. And then after the lesson, you yourself as a teacher can reflect on what went well and what could be improved next time. So if this is very new to you to be teaching life competencies through English, it's really helpful just to keep reflecting and noticing what did go well and what could be improved the next time. So you might write one what went well, WWW, and one EBI, even better if. Also, do share your successes and challenges with other teachers. It's really nice to join a community if you can, focused on sharing ideas. So like here, where we can share ideas through the chat. It's really nice if you can join a forum of teachers doing similar things and share, or maybe you're already part of a forum, and maybe start a group that is focused on life competencies, because there are so many good ideas around. And as teachers, we know that the best ideas are stolen. Well, this is what I used to say as a teacher, or I was used to be told as a teacher. So there's no shame in borrowing ideas from other people on how to teach these life competencies. And again, use what you've learnt in your reflection and through talking with other teachers to plan the next lesson. All right, so hopefully those were useful tips for you. If you would like to find out more, I'm just going to put some links up here. So if you would like to download the booklets, you can also watch some videos on each of the life competencies. They're just 2 minutes long, so you can watch them very quickly. You can go to our website, which is cambridge.org/CLCF. If you look at our YouTube channel, it's a bit of a long URL, but you can always take a picture, or if you just search for Cambridge ELT, Cambridge University Press ELT, you'll find our channel. And you'll see that on there we do have a number of webinars and teaching tips related to life competencies, so you can pick up some ideas there. And finally, on our teacher development website, again, a little bit of a long URL, apologies. You'll find short courses on some of the competencies already there, and that will be growing as we go on. And we are constantly developing the framework. The framework itself, we're constantly refining and coming up with new can-do statements and better guidance. But we're also adding extra guidance around the framework. So soon you'll be able to have some more in-depth teacher guidance. We're going to be producing some materials that you can take into the classroom to help you develop these competencies more. And also we're going to be producing some guidance on assessment of life competencies. If you would like to contribute to this by reviewing, or if you have any ideas about what would be useful, then please do get in touch with me. I'm going to put my contact details on the screen in a second. All right, so the thing I'm going to leave you with is maybe an idea for your next class. So I suggest choosing one life competency that you would like your students to develop, just as we did at the beginning of the talk today. Download that booklet from the website, so the cambridge.org CLCF, and use the framework to help you plan in an activity to develop this life competency alongside your regular language learning objectives. So hopefully that will give you a little flavour of what you can do, and will get you started on this. All right, so that is it from me today, or that's it from the information that I have to give you today. But I'm really happy to have a look now at the comments and answer some questions. So please do ask any questions in the chat. And while I wait for those to come in, I will leave my details here. So please do contact me if you are interested in life competencies and getting involved. We have a teacher survey, for example, you can get involved in. If you have any comments about how you've already been teaching life competencies, or ways that you think you could or you would like to teach life competencies, or do your own research in your classroom on how to teach life competencies, any of these things, please do get in touch. My email address here is jsilver@cambridge.org. And again, the website there for all the documents that I mentioned is cambridge.org/CLCF. All right, thank you very much. I'm going to switch modes now and hopefully answer any questions that you have. Thank you.